Saturn has just moved into the sign of Capricorn, so that's yay for the Sagittarians out there where it's moved out of that sign. Saturn is about lessons, it's about discipline and focus. So Capricorn, people with Capricorn ascendant, Capricorn moon or Capricorn sun signs will get a dose of Saturn for the next 2.5 years. So my advice would be to buckle down, focus on what needs to be worked at, and you'll see great results. May not be the most fun and frivolous time of your life, but you can see wonderful results with this placement.
Namaste. You're listening to the Savannah Podcast. Join us on an exploration of Eastern spirituality, yoga philosophy, and conscious living for the new age. This podcast is a production of SavannahSpirit.com, the best place to shop for unique clothing, spiritual handcrafted jewelry, healing gemstones, and fair trade gifts from the Far East. Now, here's your host, Brett Larkin.
Hello, Savannah family. Thank you so much for being here, for listening. Today, we're connecting with the heavens, so get excited. We are talking all things astrology with Natasha Weber, also known as Astrotash. We're going to be asking, what is astrology, really? What is a horoscope? What is a birth chart? And why might someone want this information if they're on the spiritual path? We're going to ask and find out the difference between an astrologer and a fortune teller. We're also going to demystify common terms like Mercury being in retrograde, what the full moon's all about, and what it really means to be on the cusp between two zodiac signs. If you're at all curious about why we should care about astrology in our day-to-day life, definitely don't miss this episode. And as always, if you take a quick moment to give us a rating or review here on iTunes before we dive in, that means so much to me. Okay, now introducing Natasha. She's a professional astrologer with a strong interest in birth chart analysis. She's passionate about sharing the benefits of astrology to gain greater abundance, deeper understanding, and emotional well-being for the folks that she works with. Natasha, thank you so much for being here. I'm so glad to have you on the show. And before we dive into all the details, why don't you just tell us, what is astrology? What is astrology all about?
Well, thank you firstly, Brett, for having me on the show. So astrology basically deals with a relationship between humankind and celestial phenomena, using the zodiac as a tool to do that. It dates back to ancient times, and it's really evolved throughout the epochs of time. It was used by the ancient Egyptians, the ancient Greeks, and the ancient Romans, and it was really used first to counsel kings and queens and noblemen on matters of state, wars, agriculture, and alliances. And it wasn't until much later that the lay person used the birth chart as a means of interpretation and self-development and awareness.
And what is it that you're looking at? Because I think everyone's sort of familiar with, we all know our sign, right? Like I'm a Cancer or a Leo or, whatever. But you just use the word birth chart. So what does that encompass?
Okay, so a birth chart is otherwise known as a natal chart or also a horoscope. And this is basically a map of the heavens at the exact moment in time that you were born. So if you imagine that you're born and you're smack bang in the middle of a 360-degree wheel, which is otherwise known as a birth chart or a horoscope, and you are looking up at the heavens at that moment of birth. So the birth chart is then a snapshot of all the celestial bodies in the sky above you in that moment of time, which when you think about it, that precise moment in time will never happen again and has never happened before. So it's actually as individual to you as your fingerprint. And the birth chart contains the sun, which is what we all know as our sun sign, also the moon and all the planets in all the signs and the houses, and then there's the mathematical relationship that everything makes back to each other. So it's much more complex than people realise, and certainly much more complex than just being your sun sign, which is just one small component. And from the birth chart, we can see someone's personal strengths, we can look at their weaknesses, also their greatest potentials and the areas to work on in their life. But there are different types of chart. This is just, when I'm talking about the birth chart or the horoscope, this is just your natal chart. From there, we can actually develop the chart according to different mathematical formulas. And there are all types of different charts. And we might also look at, for example, the chart of a country. And we can also look at different types of charts that are developed for that person, such as a solar return chart, which is basically when your sun returns to the exact position that it was at your time of birth. And that solar return will show the trends for 1 year for that person. So it's from birthday to birthday. And we look at different things in the different charts. So in the solar return chart, we'd look particularly at the ascendant sign, otherwise known as the rising sign. So for example, if a person has the Aries ascendant on their solar return chart for that year, then we're going to know that this year is going to be a year of action. It's possibly going to incorporate some quick decisions and events, but that person might need to be aware of hasty actions or acting impulsively is a danger there for that year. It's also going to be a year of starting new endeavours. And we know that Mars rules Aries, so Mars would be of particular interest in that solar return chart. And so we look at how that's placed and how that's interacting with the other planets in that solar return chart. And that's just one example of a chart that we can develop from the birth chart.
And that's super interesting because that's not something that I was aware of. But let's back up for a minute because I know many people are maybe skeptical, right? So like, what do you say to skeptics? Like, why would someone really want to, or should they perhaps consider having their birth chart read, then interpreted?
Okay, so, well, firstly, I'd respond to the skeptics by saying that astrology has been around for eons of time. Some of our greatest philosophers and scientists were actually astrologers, people like Plato, Socrates, Einstein and Newton. And hey, I say if it's good enough for them, it's good enough for me. But then, of course, we've got the moon, and the moon is a great example of astrology working in the modern world. The full moon controls the tides, and the human body, for example, is made up of 70% of water. So I think it's almost ignorant to separate humankind from the moon's influence. And another example is the menstrual cycle, which aligns with the moon's monthly revolution around the Earth. At the time of the full moon, the emergency departments in the hospitals escalates, and so does crime, and the term lunatic was actually coined from the full moon. Having said that, I understand that astrology is not for everyone, but I'd say not to discount it until you've had a look, especially beyond the sun sign predictions, which are fantastic and which work, but they're obviously very generalised.
And before we move on, I want to make sure, so the moon is affecting us, because you also hear about like all these women going into labor during the full moon and all these things, right? And that's because the moon is controlling the tide and we're also made up of water. Can you just talk us through that connection? Because I think it's something I've always wanted to understand more.
Okay, so in astrology, the moon represents, in a person's chart, would represent their emotional self, their deeper inner layer, whereas the sun represents our basic character. Of course, all the other planets represent different parts of ourselves, but the moon in particular is a very deep inner layer representing how we feel, what our emotions are doing. It also represents the blood and the bodily fluids. So that's from a symbolic level, that's what the moon would represent in a horoscope. But yes, it does control the tides. This is a scientific fact. And it's also a scientific fact that the human body is made up of this level of water. So I think that just goes to show how there's the science based behind the symbolism of the astrology. Of course, we have all the different moon phases, and you can tell what phase of the moon a person is born under when looking at their horoscope, depending on the degree that separates the sun and the moon within the horoscope. So, for example, people that are born at the time of a full moon, that would be a roughly 180 degrees separating the sun and the moon in that horoscope. And if someone was born at the time of the full moon, this would indicate a person that was particularly illuminated, someone who sees things as they actually are. It can also be on a slightly more challenging level, someone that is sometimes feeling divided within and without, because you have the basic character and also the emotional inner self in opposition. So this can be somewhat of a challenge. It can also represent, the sun represents the male and the moon is the feminine. So this is about an integration of the masculine and the feminine within that person. It can represent the husband and the wife also. So there are many different ways to interpret how that moon plays out in a person's chart.
And then why is the birth moment, right? How the sky is in that moment you're born, why is it that that's so relevant to sort of, I think it's the rest of your life, if I'm understanding right, when you're reading someone's chart?
Yes. Well, it's relevant because it's that precise moment in time that is attributed to us. And I guess at the end of the day, the relationship between humankind and astrology is about that moment in time and how that relates back to us. So I guess that's what it all kind of boils down to.
It's about that unique moment in time.
Exactly.
And so here's a question. Sorry if I'm getting too technical. It's really fun to be able to talk to people about this. So I don't know how many babies are born every minute or, within the minute on every second. But would that mean that two people, maybe in different parts of the world, who were born at the exact same second have like a similar destiny, or like because their birth charts would be, well, I guess their birth charts wouldn't be the same because they're in different places, right?
Well, that's actually a fantastic question because, for example, there have been interesting studies done with astrology and twins. And I, in fact, have twin brothers. So they're born in the same place, obviously, and they have very similar charts. Two things to say about that is that my brothers are 7 minutes apart. So it does make a difference. The timing does make a difference, especially when you're looking at the chart in motion, which I can explain to you a little bit later. But astrology is actually, it's not the be-all and end-all. There is always free will and there is always choice. And I feel very strongly about that. And that's what I think is so brilliant about astrology, is that it's a wonderful tool, but ultimately it's up to the person to decide how they're going to manifest the energies available to them in the chart. So just because you have a planet in a certain placement doesn't mean that it has to play out a certain way. It's giving you an energetic climate from which you then make that choice. So with my twin brothers, their lives have gone very differently because their souls or their individual persons have made different choices, and yet I believe they've been given similar circumstances and similar energies from which to draw from, if that makes sense.
No, it does. And I think it loops us back to sort of where we started, which is like, why might someone want to investigate this about themselves? Why might I want to have my birth chart read? And because here you're saying you're saying it comes back to choice, right? So is it giving me some insights into choices I may want to make or reconsider?
Yes. Well, then when you look at a birth chart, what you can do with that when a client comes to me is that you put the transits around that chart. That's just one method. And so what we can do is the transits are what the planets are doing in that moment, in this present moment. And we can compare them with what's happening in the birth chart. So we basically look at the mathematical relationship that those planets in the heavens at the current moment in time is making to the person's birth chart. And that gives us an indication as to how that's all playing out for that person at that time. So someone can prepare themselves for a challenging period that might be coming up and know how to best manifest those energies. So Saturn is a bit of a tough one. Saturn teaches us our greatest lessons, but it can also separate us from people and circumstances that are no longer useful for us. So if we can see that Saturn is about to activate a person's chart, if it's coming up to their ascendant sign, if it's going to be triggering their moon or their sun, then we're going to know as an astrologer how that's potentially going to play out, which will give the person, empower the person or the client to make the best choices available to them within that cosmic climate. So I would always instruct someone to be prepared for a time of hard work, that Saturn was offering them the opportunity to focus and discipline themselves and work very hard on a particular thing in their life, but it wasn't necessarily going to be something that was going to be frivolous and lots of fun, and that it might be challenging, but you can also give them an end date to that, a rough time period where that's going to be available to them, so that they can make the best of that circumstance, even in the challenging periods. And then, of course, you've got the most opportunistic time. For example, with Jupiter, when that's triggering an important point in the chart, we might want to say, look, this is the time to really go for it, and it's triggering your career point. So you want to really put yourself out there and don't be afraid to speak up and speak your truth and go for that job, that dream job that you've always wanted, because that opportunity is available to you then.
Today, I'm asking our listeners out there, do you meditate? Whether you're an avid meditator or just looking to get started, visit savannahspirit.com. They have everything you need to enhance your meditation practice. From mala beads to singing bowls to statues and incense, you can make your at-home meditation space truly sacred. Use the discount code PODCAST30 for 30% off your first order today. I really like this phrase you used, cosmic climate, right? So, and I think many of the listeners of the podcast, or myself, is like comfortable with this idea of energy, right? Subtle energy in the body through yoga or through meditation or, Reiki practitioners. Like we understand this idea of energy medicine, that there's energy within us and then energetics at play in the universe. It seems like you're talking about, when you're talking about the planets and all these things and the cosmic climate, you're also just talking about energy. Is that right? Am I understanding that right?
That's absolutely correct. And that's how an astrologer would really read the energies of the chart. So something can have a similar energy, but it can play out in a different way, or you can make a different choice as to how you interpret or how you manifest that energy. One example would be the Mars-Uranus combination. So when Mars makes a aspect, we call it, which is a mathematical relationship, I guess, to each other, either in the birth chart, or if Mars is traveling in the heavens and it's making an aspect to your birth chart, then it's triggering something for you with your Uranus. It's a bit of a notorious combination, these two, the Mars and Uranus. So it can be quite, the energy about it is quite volatile. But this can be interpreted in a very positive way and also in a very negative way. So in a negative way, the Mars-Uranus energy, that volatile energy, might translate to a car accident or a shocking circumstance. Whereas a positive manifestation of that same energy would be giving birth. So you can see how the energy of birth is quite a violent act, and yet it's a beautiful, positive thing. So you can see actually how the energy there is the same, but it can manifest quite differently. And a good astrologer will look at the different goings on in a person's chart and with the transits and be able to interpret the most likely outcome of that energy for that person. But then ultimately the responsibility lies with that person to a degree as well.
So let me make sure I understand and correct me. So the birth chart is sort of showing the energetics that kind of make up who I am, like maybe like my personality, my DNA. And then these transits that you're talking about is like the energetic cosmic climate in the moment. And then the astrologer is sort of seeing how those two interplay, or have I misunderstood?
That's absolutely correct. So yes, the birth chart is like your blueprint, and that is always relevant to you. That is like, I guess, your cosmic DNA. That's a really good way to describe it.
It's like my tendencies on this plane of consciousness in this lifetime kind of thing.
Yes. So it will show your potentials and give you that blueprint from which you then make the choices from, giving us an idea of your basic character, your inner self, how you might communicate, how you would choose to love, and what you are likely to attract in a relationship. And then, yes, the transits are constantly moving, obviously, and they're interacting with our birth chart. So that is going to trigger off certain circumstances or feelings or life cycles. And astrology is very much about the cycles because the planets are all about cycles. So we feel that on a deep energetic level. We experience that in our lives. But then actually there's so much more than just the birth chart and the transits. What we can do is we can take the birth chart, and I did mention before about the solar return chart to give us the trends of our personal solar year. But we can also, I love the secondary progress chart. So what that is looking at the birth chart, you apply a particular mathematical formula to that chart, which always is relevant. That is your birth chart. That doesn't change. But we can develop it to the secondary progress chart, which gives us an idea about how we are evolving to a certain point in time. So astrology really shows us many different layers of ourselves because, and this is why astrology is so complex, because the human being is so very complex and we are different layers. And I've gone off topic here, but I have to mention that when people say, oh, but I have, the moon in this earth sign and then I have my sun in an air sign, and they're contradicting each other in their influences. And I say, well, no, actually to have contradicting influences in your chart is a very good thing, because what this shows is that you've got balance. You've got a balance of the elements, the fire, the air, the earth, the water, which gives you a balanced character and a balanced life experience. So that's a good thing. But back to the secondary progress chart. So we can look and see how a person has developed and at where they are in a certain point in their life. And one important thing you would look at in a person's secondary progress chart is their secondary progress sun, which is fascinating because the sun is obviously a very important integral part of our chart. But with a secondary progress chart, we can see the sun changes sign. It changes an entire sign, which has an effect on our basic character. It gives us another layer to our basic character. And this happens only every 30 years. So every 30 years, approximately, our sun will change to an entirely different sign, and it moves through the zodiac consecutively, depending on the degree that the sun was at your time of birth. So it's not necessary. You can't really calculate it according to your age, because you have to know what degree it was when you were born. So this gives us a whole different layer to our character. So, for example, I was born as a Gemini, but then when I was 13 years old, my sun moved into the sign of Cancer. And Cancer is related to the mother and to emotions. And this was the time when my parents separated. And, I dealt with all of those emotional issues, and Cancer also rules the home. So my home was greatly affected, my home life. And this just gives us one indication. So the secondary progressed sun sign change is a really huge part of looking at a person's chart and understanding their astrology.
No, it sounds like something you'd definitely want to be aware of. And the more I hear you talk about all of this, the more shocked I am at how much of a simplification the sort of just zodiac signs are. So can you tell us a little bit about, like, how did astrology get, I don't want to use the phrase dumbed down because I don't think that's not what I mean, but how did it get to a point where people just identify with this one zodiac sign, and is there relevance in learning there, or is it really like we need to go deeper and get a full birth chart reading to get a benefit?
Yes, that's a very good point. And look, I think astrology was always greatly revered. It was actually studied back in the universities, and as I mentioned before, it was used by kings and queens, and it was highly regarded back in ancient times. With the advent of Christianity, it lost its popularity, and then it made a resurgence back in the 70s. And this was more about, kind of more the hippie free love type of revolution, that people really embraced astrology again, which was fantastic. But at the end of the day, the complexities really do rely upon the time, because without the time of birth, it's very difficult to understand your ascendant sign, because it's all calculated based on this time. So there's only so much that we can see in the horoscope without the time. There is actually, you can actually do a consultation without knowing the time, but you do have to disregard certain important elements. So most people don't know their time of birth, which makes it hard for them to know their ascendant sign. So then they look to the sun sign because that is what everybody knows. Everybody knows their date of birth. So this is where they can glean a little bit of astrological relevance. So this is where the focus has been because this is what people know. And there's still there's definitely relevance to it. But I'm a big one. I'm a huge believer in saying if you're reading your sun signs, read for your ascendant sign as well. And I've written an article on that myself because if you look at the ascendant sign, if you read your horoscope for the ascendant, it will line up more accurately with your actual birth chart that is individual to you.
No, that makes sense. I think you're right. It's just like that's what we know, right? Everyone's going to call their mom after this podcast, right? And be like, Mom, what time was I born? But another question I know people ask a lot about astrology that I'm curious to get your take on is this idea of being on the cusp, right? Someone who's like right on the edge between one zodiac sign and another. What's that all about?
Yes, and people often say to me, look, I'm on the cusp, and I say, oh, this is actually very rare because the way everything is measured within the chart is all in degrees, minutes, and seconds because it is so scientific. So to be truly on the cusp, you'd have to actually be born at 0 degrees, 0 minutes, and 0 seconds of a sign, which is highly, highly unlikely. Normally, if the sun has just moved into the next sign, you'll at least be at 1 degree of that sign. But the reason that people get a bit confused is because it is variable and it is exact to that moment in time. So the sun will move into a new sign once a month, and that's highly individualized because it would depend on the exact year for that particular person. So one year the sun might move from Gemini into Cancer on the 20th of June, but then the next year it might not be until the 21st. And then, of course, there's the time that it will move in. So one year it might be on the 20th at 4:25 p.m. and the next year it might be on the 20th at 3:35 p.m.
So this idea of being on the cusp or sort of between two signs is really, it's not really a thing, basically. It's very, very, very rare.
It would be highly, highly unlikely, yes. So I'd suggest you get your birth chart calculated and see if the sun will be in one sign or another.
So going back to that idea of the cosmic climate, I know another, besides, these phrases like being on the cusp, right, that gets tossed around a lot, is people talking about this thing called Mercury retrograde. What is that all about, and is there science behind it?
There is, and this is basically when Mercury goes into retrograde, it's not actually moving backwards. This is a symbolic notion. The reason why we say it's in retrograde is because as viewed from the Earth, it appears to move backwards. And before that, it will kind of go into a stationary still point where it remains still at one point in the zodiac in that particular degree, and then it appears to move backwards as viewed from Earth, because I do the geocentric astrology, which is another branch of astrology, as opposed to the heliocentric astrology, which is astrology as viewed from the sun. But Mercury retrograde gets a bit of a bad rap, actually. I would suggest that you wouldn't be signing any new contracts or starting any new endeavours, because Mercury represents communication and connecting with other people. So when Mercury is in retrograde, symbolically, it's not a great time to move forward because it's appearing to move backwards as it's relating to us on Earth. So not a great time to launch into new endeavours. Mercury would also, as it rules communications, it would also rule technology and mechanics. So not a great time to buy a new car or to go out and buy that new iPhone. But it's also about communication going inwards or standing still or moving backwards. So from a positive vantage point, this is a fantastic time to go inwards and to review certain things. And I often find that if you break up with somebody, for example, during a Mercury retrograde, you might find that it comes up for review on the next Mercury retrograde. So it's a great opportunity to maybe not launch into new endeavours, but to go within and to redo and to review. It's also a good time to declutter.
Yeah, that's all good advice. So why might someone, and I'm curious like how you're integrating all of this into your daily life. I'm wondering like why someone might want a consult. And I'm imagining it's the same as the kings and queens eons ago, right? They have maybe a big decision to make, or they're planning an important event like a wedding or something on a certain day. For most of your clients, like why is it that they're coming, and then what are the changes they make in their daily life once they get some of this information?
Yes, so most people may have tried conventional methods of help and support without much luck, or they're looking for something deeper. Clients often come to me when they're at a crisis or a crossroad and they just need some guidance. And astrology is a wonderful, wonderful tool that can help people navigate through those challenging periods and to help them gain a greater awareness of why something's going on, when it's going to end, or when to launch into something new. And absolutely choosing dates for weddings, electional surgery, or even relocating to a new country or health issues are all relevant to an astrology consultation. There are different types of charts, again, that different astrologers would use for these for people looking for these different things. But it can also help someone who's just aware, who's a spiritually aware person, and they're looking to become the best version of themselves. So it helps them to understand those deeper layers. For people fascinated with astrology and self-development, it's excellent. I'd say the number one thing that people are really interested in knowing about is love. I think love is our greatest teacher. It can give us our greatest and deepest pain. It's a great taskmaster. So most often people come for relationship issues, and there is a chart that can be calculated called the composite chart, which is a chart that amalgamates two charts from two different people. And from that, we can see a chart of the actual relationship itself. So that helps us to understand the areas to work on there, the challenges, and also the strengths and what's going on in the interplay between those two individuals.
If you're into boho style and ethical gifts, check out savannahspirit.com. They have beautiful, flowy clothing and unique finds like Tibetan singing bowls, sage, incense, and mala necklaces. It's a great online shop for the spiritualist. Use the discount code podcast30 for 30% off your first order today. It's interesting that this is a place people can come to, as you said, when they need guidance. And walk us through how this is really different than like getting your fortune told or something like that, right? Like, because you've mentioned math so many times and science so many times. So I'd love for you to paint that picture for us even deeper.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I have Mercury in Taurus, so I'm a very spiritual person, but I'm also quite practical in the way I think. So that's why I personally love astrology, because to me, it's the perfect combination of math and mystic. It's grounded science coupled with spiritual intuition. So for me, that works very well. But also, clairvoyants usually give you a definite outcome of a situation, whereas astrology is used as more of a tool to help people understand that cosmic climate and conditions that they're working with. So then it's up to them to decide which way they want to go, which is very empowering, I think. And to exercise that free will, as opposed to clairvoyance or a fortune teller who will tell you that this is the way it's going to play out. But I think that even a good fortune teller will say to you that nothing is ever set in stone. There might be a time to go and see a clairvoyant, and that's fine. I myself have been to see them, and I think that there's a time and a place for different types of support in our lives. But that's why I love astrology, because it's really about empowering the individual. And I believe that that's why we are here on Earth, because we're really here to learn these lessons that will help our soul to grow and to evolve. And astrology can be used to help us do that.
Now, I know some people will be inspired and they'll want to get their chart read and go deeper with all of this. For those who just want to kind of dip their toe in, what suggestions do you have for kind of making astrology a bigger part of our daily life? For example, maybe following and noticing just the cycles of the moon and being attuned to that cosmic climate could be a good start. Or can you give us some other examples or just walk us through what we should be attuned to if we wanted to just start simple?
Okay, so I would suggest getting your birth chart downloaded, which I actually offer on my website for free. So you can start with looking at your chart. And I do have a lot of people that come to me and say, well, I've got my chart, but I don't understand how to interpret it. So you can look beneath the chart and there will be a list of all of the planets in the particular degree of the sign. But just look at the planet. Look at the sign that is listed beneath your chart, and then you can start to read books, or you can follow an astrologer and follow what astrology is doing in the current time and try and relate that back to your chart. So if you've got Capricorn ascendant, and you know this from your chart, and you know that Sagittarius is moved into the sign of Capricorn, and you know that Sagittarius is about limitations and lessons and challenges and responsibility and commitment, you know that these themes are going to relate back to you, back to your ascendant chart, because you know your ascendant is in Capricorn. I'm having trouble simplifying this, aren't I?
A little bit, but I think it's still helpful.
Okay, so I'd start with your birth chart, get familiar with your chart and where the points in your chart and what signs they are in. And then, you know what, reading a great book about astrology is always a fantastic place to start, and you can self-educate that way. But I have a bit of a funny story, because when I decided that I wanted to study astrology, which was 14 years ago, I came across my academy and I called up Pam Rowe, who was my teacher. I said to her, so how long is this going to take me? How long will it be until I would become a fully fledged astrologer? And she said to me, well, you know, we never really stop learning about astrology. And I thought, I was kind of frustrated at the time, because I thought, well, what sort of an answer is that? I want to know when. But it's very true. The truth is it's a constant evolution of knowledge and self-awareness and understanding. So I think if you start with your chart and start with a great book, it will just naturally develop from there.
Beautiful. Well, it's been so fun getting to know more about astrology, and I feel like some common misconceptions I have definitely been cleared up. Is there anything else you really want to let listeners know or share with people about this work before we close?
Thank you very much for having me on the show. It's been a pleasure talking about the subject that I'm most passionate about. I just say that Saturn has just moved into the sign of Capricorn, so that's yay for the Sagittarians out there where it's moved out of that sign. Saturn is about lessons, it's about discipline and focus. So Capricorn, people with Capricorn ascendant, Capricorn moon or Capricorn sun signs will get a dose of Saturn for the next 2.5 years. So my advice would be to buckle down, focus on what needs to be worked at, and you'll see great results. May not be the most fun and frivolous time of your life, but you can see wonderful results with this placement.
Wonderful. And how can people stay connected with you online? Because I know as you said, you have some free resources and you're always updating and offering the different zodiac signs. I know I checked mine out right before I got on the call and I really liked how you had written it up. So where can people connect with you?
Oh, thank you so much. Yes, well, my website is astrotash.com, and then I love my Instagram. I'm posting on there daily horoscopes and little bits of astro info, which I love to share. So that's Astrotash at Astrotash.
Perfect. And we'll also put all those links right below so people can easily find them. Listeners, let me know. Are you more intrigued about astrology after today's episode? You can let us know at the private Facebook group. You know how to get there. SavannahEast.com/group will redirect you and we can approve you as a member. And of course, I always love your feedback in the forms of ratings and reviews here on iTunes, even if iTunes isn't how you normally listen to the show. Let me know how I'm doing. and leave us some comments or just a star rating here on iTunes. It really helps get the show in front of more listeners looking to improve their life through yoga and meditation. So much love. I hope you get curious about your sign. I know I'm definitely going to call my mom tonight and ask about the exact time of my birth so I can get a little bit more detail there. And I'm sending you so much love from my heart to yours. Namaste.
You've been listening to the Savannah Podcast. To find out more about Savannah, go to savannahspirit.com or follow Savannah on Facebook at facebook.com/Savannah Spirit. For daily inspiration, check out our blog at savannaeast.com. Be sure to join us next week for a new episode, and thank you for listening to the Savannah Podcast.